I'm Dr. Lizzie Burns, and I've been working on a collection of drawings all about viruses and vaccines. And I'm here today with a virologist, Dr. Chloe Myers, who has agreed to join me while I colour in and ask lots of questions about the virus that we're all obsessed with, the coronavirus. So hopefully you've got two sheets printed out. One shows the outside of the virus and the other shows the inside. So I recommend that you colour each in and then you'll be able to cut them out and you can glue them together, or it could be a little flap that you lift up, or if you have one on each side, you could maybe hang it on a thread and have it as a little decoration. So I'm going to continue. I've started colouring in, but I'm going to continue colouring in and I'm going to ask Chloe questions. So if you join me, grab your pencils, your pens, colour in and just listen while I'm asking lots of questions. Right, so the outside of the virus, Chloe, I guess we think of these as viruses as spiky. What are these spikes for? Do they do anything?
Yeah, so these spikes, vary for each virus, and they're very important because they are what binds with our cells, and that's the very first step in terms of infection. So they're very specialized, and like I say, they can change over time, and they generally adapt to make themselves bind better and better. And so they'll bind to receptors. In the case of coronavirus, it's generally receptors that are found in our upper respiratory tract, so in our nose and our throat, because that's quite often where people will inoculate themselves, shall we say, with the virus, and then it will bind to those cells, and then that's the first step. So it binds, and then it's able to release the contents of its cell into one of our cells, and that's how the cycle starts.
So a receptor is like a little sticky out protein, a little sticky out thing on the outside of your cells. Yeah. So it's almost like a little can get in with like a key into a little door or something, the virus maybe.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good way of describing it.
That's great. So we've got the spikes, which would try to get into you. And what's the rest of it, the kind of the body of it, the background? I'm colouring in a sort of greeny colour. What's the outside as well as the spikes?
So again, viruses in general are very simple structures. So in terms of, so in the middle, all they've got is some information that encodes how to make more copies of the virus. Yeah, exactly. And then outside, so all it is a bit of genetic information, and that's covered with a capsid, which is also made out of protein. So that's the green that you're colouring in now. And then the spikes that are also protein. And then some viruses have, including coronavirus, have a lipid envelope, which is made of lipids. So sort of they're not simple in terms of, if you look at them, as you can see, they're very complex and made up of lots of different things, but essentially those are the components of what makes up a virus. And it's that lipid envelope which can vary between, so some have a lipid envelope and some don't.
So it's the kind of fatty bit. And is that why soap's effective against these viruses?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And that's how we decide. So in the community and in hospitals, this is a very important component and how we control the virus, and very sort of fundamental. So if a virus has a lipid envelope, a fatty envelope, it actually makes them slightly more susceptible. So that's why with these viruses and coronavirus, you can also use alcohol gel.
Yes.
And that disrupts that lipid envelope and helps break it down. But there are other viruses, if you think about like noroviruses that cause diarrhea and vomiting, and adenovirus, which I've talked about before, they're non-enveloped. So with those viruses, it's important because then alcohol gel is actually less effective against those. So that's why, yeah, so we're lucky in that respect with coronavirus, but that's why hand washing is so important, because for them all, if you give good soap and water, that disrupts the outer membrane of the viruses, and so they just break and not able to function anymore.
So the outside has got the spikes, and so this is the outside is the envelope, is it? Like, I guess like a letter, and you've got the things inside.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So
Like a
looking
protect.
inside here, you said about some of the instructions here. So is
Yeah,
that right?
yeah.
And then I guess you can see the same spikes, but in kind of a cross section, so you can see through them as well. There's lots of little things in there. Yeah, I guess they all do something, don't they? I guess they're still trying to figure out what they do.
Yeah, exactly. They're very much a work in progress. And viruses vary a lot in terms of the genetic information that they contain. So it's a bit sort of like a blueprint, and you may or may not be familiar. So you know that all human cells have something called DNA inside of them, and this gets copied into something that's called RNA. That's then that gets translated into the proteins that make things up. And with viruses, you can get every single different type of combination. So you can get DNA viruses, RNA viruses. Sometimes they can be single-stranded or double-stranded, but essentially that carries the information. And the reason why they're not able to function on their own is because they rely on infecting other cells, and that's because they need the machinery that's contained within our cells in order to make copies of themselves. And because they're sort of so simple, you know, just from a single infection, you can get they take over the machinery that's contained within our cells to make thousands of copies. So it's a bit like hitting, you know, a photocopier button where you put in a single sheet of information, and you can hit thousands of copies and spew out thousands of copies of the same thing that then bursts out of the cell. So very efficient.
So I guess the best thing is obviously not catching it in the first place, if possible.
If possible.
How do you catch the coronavirus? I mean, I know we've been hearing a lot about it, but just a really quick, short recap, Chloe. How do you catch this thing?
So a lot of the time it's sort of droplets that are, so as part of it, particularly very early in the infection, you'll be shedding lots and lots. As I said, there'll be thousands and millions of copies of this virus being, if you've got a new infection. And if you were to cough or sneeze, you obviously spray that virus into your local environment. And so that's why we do things like wear masks, so that when we talk or if we cough, we're not aerosolizing this, spraying this virus around in the environment around us. But also it's able, because of these droplets, they can land on things, they can land on surfaces, which is why you know, you may not even be around people, but then you're touching surfaces where these viruses may have landed, and then you could pick them up and say touch your face, and give yourself the virus and give yourself an infection. So that's
no, it won't go through your skin, but it's touching things like eyes and your mouth,
nose and your mouth.
You do without quite thinking about it. But we've probably hopefully all got better at that.
I think we have all got a lot better.
Took quite a bit of effort, didn't it? It's really hard to relearn things. Just one final question for this. Why is this virus causing such trouble in the body?
Yeah, so this is quite a complicated one to answer, and it varies. So obviously some people, it can cause really severe infection in the body, but other people are infected by this virus and it doesn't cause them any problems at all. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not able to pass this virus on to other people. But the reason why, you know, coronaviruses cause us such problems, well, not just so there are lots of coronaviruses around. They can cause things like the common cold that we've experienced for years and years. The reason why specifically this SARS coronavirus 2 virus causes more problems is because it's a new virus to us. So as I sort of have mentioned in a previous clip, every now and then, it doesn't happen very often, but viruses that are normally adapted to certain animals or organisms, every now and then they make changes to themselves, because they're able to sort of mutate, like I said, and change their structures all the time. And they make a jump at some stage from an animal or organism that they were originally infecting into humans. And if they also have, the reason why this doesn't happen very often, because the reason why viruses are normally in a certain animal is because they've adapted to do that. So in order for them to survive into a new host, i.e. us, they also have to change to be able to spread between us. And because it's a virus that none of us have seen before, that's why it's been so successful, because our immune systems aren't able to recognize.
So it's kind of us that we have to fight it off, really.
Yeah. It's like when people are very small and babies, and you tend to, you know, they get lots of infections because your immune system's not encountered any of them before. And so all of us are encountering this for the first time, which is why it's caused such a problem.
Oh, and the more vulnerable you are, the more likely you are for something to go wrong. Well, thank you so much, Chloe. It's been just brilliant to ask you questions. I hope in the classroom or at home that you've been having fun colouring this in, sticking up together and celebrating that science does bring us hope as well. Thank you.
Thank you.